Is the start. Okay. I'm just going to share my screen and just give me a verbal, somebody say if they can see my screen. Yeah.
It's
Okay, cool.
visible.
Awesome. Awesome. And you can all hear me okay. Let me just pop the chat up. Yeah, if you have any questions, certainly feel free to put them in the chat. I can stop or get them at the end. So thanks everybody for being here. I'll just introduce myself in a moment, but just to give you an agenda of what's happening today is this is a presentation about Harvard's institutional repository called Dash. And so today what we'll do is we'll go over a little bit about what Dash is, how you can participate and put your works into Dash. We'll also talk a little bit about just additional services that come from my department in the library, and we'll talk just a little bit about Dash from the user side as well. The presentation's not very long, so hopefully if you have questions, you can certainly talk at the end. Let's see, how do I... So I'm Colin Lukens. I'm the senior repository manager here at the mouth-filling Harvard Library Open Scholarship and Research Data Services Department. Our acronym is OSWORDS, so that's a little bit sometimes easier to remember. I'm actually a trained archivist, but moved over to this side of the library almost a decade ago. So I've been working in Dash and kind of areas of open access and open scholarship and publishing, open publishing for over a decade or so. Just moving on. So what is our department? A little introduction. There's a lot of different units in the library. It's kind of hard to keep track, but basically our official kind of mission is to assist Harvard scholars to expanding world knowledge and intellectual exploration through the creation, promotion, and support of new and existing models of sharing research outputs. Forgive me, that's kind of a word salad. It's a new department. We blended two departments together, so it's kind of a new thing for all of us to kind of have a new mission. But in short, really, if you kind of take the admin speak out of this, basically what we're here to do is help people make their scholarship more visible, more discoverable, and more accessible out within Harvard and beyond. So we'll go over what our services are in a moment, but that's kind of an overview of what our particular area of the library is focused on. So here's kind of the services we provide. So I just preface this in case any of these, if you have any questions about these or you're interested in what Harvard provides or the benefits, here's kind of where we are. You can certainly reach out to us. I'll give you my contact at the end. So we manage Harvard's open access policies. So there are faculty policies, and there are also the individual policies, which you all qualify for. The original policies were for faculty. And in essence, what the open access policies do is it gives you the right to distribute scholarship you create while you're at Harvard, and you get to kind of ignore what a lot of the publishers or other profit institutions kind of say you can do with your work. And so that just obviously opens your scholarship up to a much greater audience and kind of avoids the kind of profit paths that a lot of publishing can take. We also deal a lot with research data and making it findable, accessible, and interoperable and reusable. We'll talk about a service that we support. If you do actually have research data, there's a lot more expectations to make research data kind of available for folks to replicate your research or to to kind of for folks to fact check that. We're also getting into sponsoring publishing here a bit at Harvard. I won't get into overlay journals. It's a complicated environment, but a lot of what we're doing is, a lot of the journals out there are owned by big companies that make a lot of money and charge money in all different areas. And so the library is beginning to offer services for folks who are affiliated with Harvard to kind of shift over to kind of the nonprofit, more open environment for publishing. So we're trying to do some work in that area. Scholar communications is kind of a big bucket. It's basically like how you distribute your work, or you're into publishing licensing or contracts and those sorts of things. We can certainly help you in that area. Dash we'll talk about today. And then we also do increasingly more work with ETDs, which is the acronym for electronic theses and dissertations. So for those of you when you finish your program, you might create a thesis or even a dissertation. And so we help you guide through the process about the university's new policies about making those more open through Dash. And there's also, sometimes people need to hold their dissertation or thesis back for a number of reasons, and so we assist folks in that. And then we'll talk about ORCID, which is a really cool benefit if you're in the scholarly community to kind of help define who you are and your work. So we'll talk a little bit about ORCID towards the end because it's kind of peripheral to DASH, but it's also really important. So here's kind of a visual representation of where we land as far as our services. So this is kind of a pictorial representation of what we call the research life cycle. So the idea is you come up with an idea and you find people who have like ideas, and then you take that idea and you move it into kind of the research and development phase. And a lot of those phases you might interact with other librarians as far as maybe working with primary sources in an archive or working with a reference librarian. To help you kind of find materials. And then obviously there's writing centers here at Harvard. Some are situated within kind of the library ecosystem and some aren't. But of course, they're the ones that help you kind of develop, your ideas and help you write that. And then we're kind of in this rough triangle. We're more on what's called the output stage. So if you have data to back up your research, for example, you might work with some of my colleagues to kind of share that data or analyze it or kind of curate it in a way. And then DASH and some of the other publishing, the scholarly communications support really comes more on the kind of towards the publication phase. So I just wanted to show you where we kind of land as you move forward. Here's kind of the services. So I always say kind of like if you had a piece of scholarship and you came forward to us and you said like, what do I do with the certain outputs that I have? This is just kind of helps you place where DASH sits in this kind of process. So if you were, for example, to have data you need to share, we would help you or support you getting into Harvard Dataverse, which is basically a repository to store data and data sets, and those are open to others. Publishers are increasingly asking for data sets to be public, so there's some importance to looking into Dataverse. And then DASH, of course, sits with the publication, and it sits within kind of the more traditional publishing environment. So you might consider, if you write a journal article, for example, you might submit it to a journal, for peer review, and then the peer review, it would accept that article before peer review, rather. It'd go through that process, and then you might be published. And again, that could be for either journals or if you were to put together a book or a chapter in a book with a number of authors. So the whole DASH sits kind of underneath that kind of traditional publishing model, and in that it distributes your scholarship more widely and more openly than maybe in some of these other areas. And just wanted to mention the preprint and disciplinary repositories too. The landscape is getting quite confusing and crowded as far as where to put your work. So more and more disciplines, mostly in the STEM fields, have preprint or disciplinary repositories. I'm certainly happy to answer a little bit more questions about this, but in essence, there's subject repositories. So for example, if you were a scholar in physics and you said, I have this idea, I'm starting to write this idea as in the form of a paper with some colleagues or even by myself, and I want to put it out to the community, kind of take the temperature of the community, kind of want to put a flag in this research, like this is what I'm working on. There's a preprint repository for that. So the idea is that you haven't even published this idea, and you're kind of putting it out there. And this is increasingly becoming more common and actually encouraged in a lot of disciplines. So as you publish, there's three things I'll say here is consider DASH as a mechanism to distribute your work. Look to see if you have a preprint repository or disciplinary repository in your field. And if you do, certainly consider putting any sort of scholarship you develop there. And then, of course, if you want to get published, then there's the whole publishing contract world and kind of acceptance peer review in that world. So again, certainly happy to answer any case studies or actually direct questions you have on that, but just wanted to show you where our services kind of land in the larger publishing world there. So on to DASH. So DASH, again, is Harvard's central repository, and it's available to all researchers here at Harvard. And so it's open to anyone with an internet connection across the world. And the only folks who can deposit in it are those who have Harvard affiliations. So while you're at Harvard, if you kind of engage in any of these types of scholarship that I've talked about in the last slide, then you definitely want to consider Dash as a place to put your work for people to kind of view it and see it outside of kind of more the traditional means, or even for the paid means, which are in the more traditional scholarship sense. So Dash accepts essentially anything that's scholarly. So we're really focused mainly on kind of the journal article right now. That's expanding a bit, but that's really essentially still at the core of what Dash distributes. So we kind of consider conference proceedings and of course preprints as kind of journal article-esque. We also do report, kind of distribute reports and white papers for labs and other types of kind of departments and programs at Harvard. And of course, I talked about dissertations and theses a little bit. Again, if you write a thesis at Harvard, it does show up in Dash after you get your degree. We're less interested in things like coursework and things like that because those typically don't fall into the kind of more traditional research life cycle kind of processes but if you have those types of writings and you're interested in what you can do with those, definitely reach out to us. Sometimes it would be, maybe good for Dash to take those, but traditionally we're mainly interested in these kind of official pieces of scholarship. So if you have these as you move forward, definitely consider Dash as one of maybe a few of your outlets for that particular work. So a little bit about Dash. It contains about 60,000 works. Again, some are theses and dissertations, but it's largely journal articles by all different types of folks at Harvard. It sees a ton of traffic. I don't know what the daytime load is, but it's 40 or 50,000 articles are downloaded per day. So we see millions of downloads per year, and we've seen 60 plus million since we started Dash in 2009. So it's twofold. You put things in Dash, people will see it. It's highly discoverable. And then the other thing is that it really does show you that even if you do have an article or a conference proceeding or a chapter in a collected anthology with a number of different researchers in your area, it's like even if you go through the traditional means of publishing, it gets published in a journal or in a book, and those journals or books are for sale, having a version on Dash is important. It shows you that people are also there's a big appetite for works out of Harvard that are available for free as an option to the traditional, in addition to these other outlets. So transitioning to the kind of the nuts and bolts of using Dash, it's pretty easy. So let's say you do have a piece of scholarship. You're like, okay, maybe I'm working on getting it published. Maybe it's a preprint, hasn't been peer reviewed. Maybe I've put it into a disciplinary repository or not. And I just want to make a version of it available to as many people as possible. So for on the deposit side, you literally go to dash.harvard.edu. You can see the URL and the logo there. You basically log in through using Harvard Key, and then it'll autofill what's called an assistance authorization. You'll see that on the menu when you log in. And basically what that does is it gives us permission to process your work in Dash. So there's just, the lawyers have said, hey, if you're touching works that other people have deposited, you just kind of need their permission. It's just a one-time form. And when you sign it, you basically give us the permission to process any work you deposit in Dash from that date forward. So it's not a real burden. You just sign it once. By signing the assistance authorization form, you opt into the individual open access license. And so what the individual open access license does is, and there's more information about this on our website, it gets kind of deep in the legality of what the license does. But basically, in short, what it does is you opt into the license that Harvard has established. And what it does is it gives you the right to distribute manuscript versions of your work in Dash without basically getting the permission of the publisher. So one common scenario is you might have a journal article that is accepted into a publication, a journal. And so the publisher may come forward to you and say, here's the contract. It's got a bunch of copyright clauses in it. You give us this, you keep that. And then it might also say, hey, but for $3,000, we'll make this version available for free. So instead of putting it behind what we call a paywall, meaning that either an institution like Harvard has to pay big money to provide the subscription to all of the Harvard community, or if you weren't affiliated with an institution, you'd pay $35 or whatever to read the article. They say, well, we'll just make it available for free. So what the publisher is basically doing is they're saying, you're basically paying the price to make it available to all. A former colleague of mine used to call this the public television model, and the idea that public television asks people to donate to public television to keep the lights on so that everyone can read it for free. So that's what publishers are kind of doing there. But since you're at Harvard and you opt into the open access license, we'll distribute the manuscript version of your article for free. And you can decline all of those things that the publisher says. And the publisher may even say, we don't really allow you to do X, Y, and Z with your work once you sign this clause. But the open access license protects you from that to some degree. It allows you to take the manuscript version before you sign a contract and make it available in Dash. So it's kind of a powerful thing. And you don't have to opt into anything extra. You just go in, and when you sign the assistance authorization form, you're automatically opt in. So let us know if you have any questions about that, but it's a real benefit for being at Harvard here is to have this license. I think we're only the second or third institution that actually offers this to everyone at the institution, not just faculty. And then there's a quick submit deposit form. So once you're done with that authorization, you'll see another menu choice that says quick submit. Basically, you just go in there and you give us a little bit of information about who you are, what the work is. You basically tell us who the authors are and the title. If it's already published or in process, you could provide us with what's called a DOI. Publishers issue basically like a unique code that basically links to each individual article. That helps us kind of figure out what your article is and kind of leverage some information sharing to figure out what that is. So that's a time saver if your work is already published. And then you just hit deposit and you submit it to us. And then after a little bit of time, we process it and we basically make it available in Dash. And that might be under a number of different licenses in Dash, but in the end, they all provide open access to your work, which is hopefully the reason you come to Dash and kind of a goal. So here's a pictorial kind of representation of the process. So this is a screenshot of what Dash looks like. And obviously up in the upper right-hand corner is after you log in, your name should be there. There's not really much of a kind of a profile to Dash really at all since it's connected to Harvard Key. And then you can see down there on the left-hand side that's where the assistance authorization is. If you were to deposit without the assistance authorization form, the system would basically say, we can't do anything with this work, and it would basically reject it. So it's pretty important for before you deposit to make sure you have that authorization form. And we're happy to answer any questions you have about any of the wording in the form or what it means. And then the quick submit is just below the assistance authorization form. So again, that's just for you to get to the submission form. It's a 4-step process. So you can see on the green line above. It's pretty easy if you do actually have what that DOI, like I said, you can put that in the search box here and kind of autofill a lot of the fields that fall on the next screen. But if you don't, you just hit next and it just asks you to describe the work. And then you just upload a version. One note here is most successful pathway to open access in Dash is to give us the final manuscript version. And I'll just tell you why. For the most part, once you sign a publishing contract, then everything after that, like the publisher's version, is copyrighted to them. So a lot of folks, they'll say, hey, I have this great art journal article. I'm real proud of it. I'm going to put it in Dash and make it available to folks. And then they give us that publisher version. It has their name across the front. It has page numbers on it. They kind of take the PDF they got from the publisher, or they find it online through Hollis or the journal's website. Those are copyrighted by the journal itself. And so we're actually not allowed to put that version up. So again, we'd have to reject that work on the copyright grounds. But if you sign the assistance authorization form, and it includes that individual open access license, we actually reserve under that license the right to distribute the manuscript version in Dash. So if you we always say if you deposit the manuscript version, the pathway to success in Dash is very high. The only exception is if you were to publish in an open journal, which again I can talk about, where they have an open license. So if you publish an article or a book chapter or a conference proceeding and it has a CC BY license on it, we can actually make that work available because that's basically the publisher or you have decided I can make this work available to anyone. And that's a confusing landscape as well. So if you do actually find yourself in kind of a position where you're like, there's a bunch of licenses, I don't know which ones to choose. Some say CC BY, some say all rights reserved. All these, we can help you navigate kind of the advantages and disadvantages to those. But I would say, even if you don't know, when in doubt, take the version you have and submit it to Dash. We can always work with you to find the version that makes the most sense. But again, if you do have the final version, the manuscript version, then you submit that and we have the best chance of getting that in Dash. So I mentioned some of this before, but once you submit a work, it enters in our review and we kind of look at it and kind of flesh out the metadata. That's like basically we catalog it. We further describe your work and we attach a license that makes the most sense to it. Basically, we try to give it the open access license if we can, but if we don't, then we kind of look for other licenses that the publisher allows for to make your work available. Again, the assistance authorization means that you don't have to understand that landscape at all. We do all that work for you. So basically, it's in Dash, and that's kind of the end goal. A lot of folks think once they hit submit in the quick submit that it just automatically appears. That's not true. It actually has to go through kind of a vetting from library staff. We try to keep on top of deposits as quickly as we can, but we always advise folks that if you need a work up for a conference or to share or for anything career related, you should definitely reach out to us and try to get us to expedite that. It falls at the bottom of the queue when you submit, and we work through that queue from the top down. So if you're like, I need this next week to share for a conference or something, let us know. And then again, this last point, if you give us a work that we've determined we can't distribute because of copyright or other licensing conditions, we used to restrict it in Dash, but actually now the system rejects it, which is frustrating because then it means you have to go back and resubmit. But this version of Dash right now that we're looking at is going to be actually upgraded at the end of the year. And so if you were to do that, instead of having to resubmit, it would just send it back to your kind of essentially your shopping cart and say, hey, look, we can't make this version available. Consider giving us this instead. So there's some improvements there, but just so you know, if you do submit something and you get an email that says, sorry, it's been rejected for these reasons, please resubmit. It'll tell you how to do that and what version we're looking for. But again, you can always reach out to us for any assistance there. Just check the chat. So Jake, you talk about a DOI. I'll just take a moment to say that Dash does not mint DOIs right now. We're hoping to do that at some point in the future, but that's not right now. So we would, when you deposit something, if it already has a DOI through the publisher, then the Dash record would reflect that. But you would not receive a DOI for a article that you just deposited, like a preprint or an accepted manuscript version. We have our own proprietary deep linking kind of schema. It's called NRS. So it's not recognized like a DOI, but it does essentially what a DOI does is if you embed this NRS link anywhere, it's a permanent link directly to the work itself. So you could kind of embed that on your website, or you could provide that to anyone. And if we change the repository or move it or do anything, then that link would still work. Harvard Dataverse. So if you were to put data over at Dataverse, they're beginning to start to mint DOIs for data sets. So there is some movement there. And again, there is definitely a future where Dash will provide DOIs going forward. And then to the next question about accessible to alumni, currently it is not. It is acceptable to all to read and download papers, but to submit, right now it's limited to your current affiliation. So there's a few caveats to that. If you were to come into Harvard and had works that were peer reviewed or published in the past, and you now have come to Harvard, you could submit those as a Harvard affiliate. The licensing might make it more difficult for us to deposit those, but it's certainly worth working with us to say, hey, I had 5 articles I published somewhere else. Now I'm at Harvard. You can put them in Dash. And then once you leave Harvard, those works remain in Dash, but you couldn't then return to Dash as an alumni and then deposit. So it's an institutional repository, so it reflects the current output of current scholarships, or current scholars rather. So now your work is deposited in Dash. What does that mean? So the version in Dash is now acceptable to all to read. You can see download statistics. You can see how often it's being downloaded, which is often really cool. Not only is it just kind of fun to see, we've heard from folks who have taken the download statistics of their thesis, for example, or some other articles and kind of talk those up for employers, or, I mean, there's just all sorts of different things you can do with the metrics there. Again, that persistent link I just talked about, it's not a DOI, but it's a library proprietary persistent link. That's very valuable to folks too. We're really indexed by search engines. I like to brag that actually when you Google things that are in Dash, we often are the first or certainly above where the publisher would land. So a lot of folks like that because we just describe work so well. The information we have around works is much better than typically publishers provide. So if you really want people to find your work very easily and quickly, and also Google Scholar too. That's a big important area for folks. And then we'll preserve it. So again, when you leave, it'll stay in Dash. Dash is backed up by the library, so it's not going anywhere. And then we'll talk a little bit about reader stories in a moment. So again, just to break these down, so once it's in Dash, it's available for anyone to read. This is what a Dash landing page looks like. So this was one of my colleagues who talked about kind of coursework online around COVID-19. They deposited their journal article, best practices. So you can see here, Dash reflects the citation. There's a link to the research data there that goes to, actually that goes to OSF, which is another data repository, Open Science Foundation. We can reflect an abstract. There's that term of use. So whatever license we determine is the most powerful for you and reserves the most rights is reflected there for users to read and see, what can I do with this work? Can I download it? Can I sell it? Can I put it in a course pack? Those sorts of things. Those are all outlined there. There's that NRS link, citable link to this page. That's the deep link. And then on the left, you can see there's the download for the work itself. And then we list the authors. So these two folks were at Harvard. So we put cute little Harvard shield next to their name. And also link to, if you click those names, it takes you to Dash and lists all the other works by those folks. So it's kind of a nice convenience. And then there's the publisher version. So if you have a DOI from a publisher or the work lives on another website somewhere officially, we link out. And we also link to any other versions you have. So if another version lives with a research institution or a preprint repository, disciplinary repository, that sort of thing, we can link to those too. And then we just tell users where it lives. And in this case, these folks are in Harvard Central Administration, so that's the collection that it lives in. So this is what a Dash page looks like with a thumbnail and all for works that have been deposited. Here's a look at what the statistics currently looks like. So again, this is for that work. It's been a while since I've updated the slide, so you can see when it was deposited was basically around July 2021, and then immediately saw a handful of downloads. So any work in Dash, these metrics are available, so you can kind of see who's looking at it and then who then further download it. So oftentimes we see downloads that are higher than page views, but and that's a good thing. It means people are coming to Dash or through Google, and they're actually downloading your work instead of looking at it and being like, no, this wasn't what I want. I'm going to move on or whatnot. So that's what that looks like. Again, I'm talking about the persistent link. I did that already. That's very valuable to folks. We often encourage people to deposit all their works to Dash instead of using ResearchGate, Academia EDU, or their own website. And the reason is because A, Dash isn't going anywhere. B, the permanent link. The links won't change. Academia EDU or any of those, they can change the links at any time. And then they're for profit. So Academia EDU, ResearchGate, those sorts of things, they sell your data. They could take your work down at any time. We've heard of folks who spend, a Friday afternoon uploading 10, 12, 14 works to these other sites only to have them all be taken down because they violate copyright or something like that. So the persistent link kind of represents this whole ecosystem that Dash is that it's very permanent, it's very compliant, and so lots of folks build their own personal website instead of housing their own works. They'll just link to Dash. And again, you could do that when you leave. So if you deposit 3 works and leave and you have them on your website, the permanent link, you can just keep them there forever. Again, I talked about it, search indexing. So I Googled this title, and of course it came up even over the official kind of place that it lives, which is the second OSF, which is the second instance there. That's kind of the official place that these authors put their work for a conference. And there it is. So Dash, it rose to the top. So again, that's pretty important to folks, and that's a real advantage of Dash. Again, the preservation aspect, we keep it forever. We've got state-of-the-art preservation, all that kind of stuff. So we can certainly, it's there for the long term. I just want to stop for a question here. Can you set up a notifications when others upload their scholarly work? Yeah, there is. We do have kind of more ancient RSS feeds that you can kind of subscribe to. Those are on the homepage. If you go to any work, there's the little RSS kind of feed, and I think it lets you define either author or keywords. The other thing I do have to say is I believe Google does have some ability to set up monitoring too, especially for Google Scholar. So you can put in kind of Harvard and some other things, some other parameters, and then it'll let you know what that looks like, or when new works are deposited. The new repository coming in supposedly September has a much more powerful kind of subscription mechanism in there. So if you're still here, this fall, I would definitely revisit that with the new repository. So I know that's a much stronger tool within the new service that we're going to provide. And then just this next question, I have an unpublished PhD thesis since I completed my doctoral research. Would I be able to? So if it's unpublished, we would probably not be able to take an unpublished PhD thesis, like as a matter of practice, largely because we're focused on kind of peer-reviewed material, and also because the PhD thesis from your school in India, they might hold institutional record control over that. So for example, if you have a thesis or dissertation here, you hold copyright over it here at Harvard, which means you can make it something else. But it's considered a university record here. And so while we're not going to scour the earth to see if Harvard folks are putting their theses on different repositories, we would tend to, as a matter of practice, probably not accept a whole PhD thesis in Dash because you matriculated from a different institution. So if you need to talk about that further, we can certainly talk about that, if you have more further questions about that. That's Matt. It's more of like a best practices than we have a specific policy about it. So the one kind of nice feature about Dash is we receive a lot of stories from users. So when folks download a work in Dash, we append a cover sheet. So if you were to go and look at Dash for work, download the PDF, the first thing you'd see is a cover sheet that says, this is from Dash, this is the citation. And then we provide a link for folks. And we say, hey, if this article or work that you've downloaded kind of means something to you, or, we'd love to hear from you about how open access has helped your scholarship. And we surprisingly, we receive many of these a day. And they're from all over the world, and some of them just say thanks. And then some of them are incredibly meaningful or moving. And so we are building right now, we store these, but we're working on a mechanism to link the record itself in Dash with the story. So the idea is that if you have a work in Dash past September, when we move to the new repository, and someone submits a story that's about your work, then it would be reflected somehow publicly in Dash. And so these are great because like you hear directly from folks who are making use of the works and how it benefits them. And so this one is, we parade this one out because of course it's like, someone from a place where there's censorship, or they have a harder time accessing scholarship where they are. We receive a lot of those from different parts of the world. And then I like this one a lot because it talks about the kind of the pace. So lots of times people who aren't in traditionally, maybe research one wealthy institutions or institutions at all, maybe they're K-12 independent researchers, et cetera. Like not only do they don't have the funds to collate all the research documents they need, lots of times just takes a really long time. So to get those things into people's hands. And so especially over COVID, for example, we fast-tracked a lot of preprints about COVID and saw hundreds of thousands of downloads of those works because the publishers were like, the publishing process is 6 months to 9 months to a year oftentimes. And if a really respected scientist here at Harvard submits an article that's gone through maybe peer review or not, and it's just a preprint, and we make that available in Dash, it's just the pace of scholarship in Dash is just a lot more quick. It's faster. So that's another nice benefit to Dash. So that's kind of the deposit side. That's kind of you're an affiliate at Harvard and you're kind of want your work included. Just a brief note that obviously you at Harvard can use Dash as well. So most folks use Hollis, which actually indexes Dash. So if you were to search in Hollis for things and there was a Dash record, it would be reflected there. And also, obviously, most folks, a lot of folks use Google and Google Scholar. And again, I mentioned we're heavily indexed, so you may encounter Dash works there. But some folks start in Dash, especially if they're looking at a specific discipline. So if they're like, I want everything in this area, I want to search keywords, I want Harvard scholarship in this area. Or a lot of folks write us and say, I'm interested in the programs at Harvard and I'm looking at the theses or dissertations that are coming out of this school, GSAS or DCE. And so, yeah, so you can use Dash for discovery as well. It works just like any other library database. There's a search bar in the upper left. If you to leave that blank and hit the little magnifying glass, it just takes you to an advanced search, which just allows you to kind of define your parameters, whether that's authors or date. You can search by keyword, that sort of thing. So it does have a pretty robust discovery element to it too. So you can always go to Dash and try to find what you're looking for. That's based at Harvard. We have a help page on the Harvard Library website. I don't know if you've been to the Harvard Library website. It's really great. Up in the upper left, it says help with, and you drop down, it says tools and services, and it lists all of the tools and services. We're a tool. Dash is considered a tool. So if you need a refresher on anything I spoke about, or you want links to anything, then this is a great page to go refer to. So it kind of tries to explain Dash as quickly as possible. And again, you don't have to remember links. You can just go here. I just want to take a little detour from Dash, and Park Dash is certainly happy to answer any more questions you have. I just wanted to give a shout out to ORCID. I don't know if folks have Orchid. If you do, sorry, this might be, repetitive or whatnot, but if you don't have an Orchid, I would really highly uh, advise you to consider it. It's basically a permanent ID for your scholarly self, is kind of how I put it. Basically, ORCID stands for Open Researcher and Contributor ID. It's an open, free, kind of permanent identifier that you sign up for. It takes about a minute. And then basically you're provided with an ORCID record. And in that ORCID record, you can tell the world, essentially, or the scholarly community and the world too, who you are, what you've published, where you've been affiliated, where you've gone to school, what awards you've gotten, grants, et cetera, et cetera. And so the nice thing about ORCID is that first and foremost, you control it. For lots of years, publishers kind of told the world who you were as you published, or institutions did. And now this ORCID means that you're pretty much in the driver's seat. It's also helpful if you publish under different names or your name is common. And ORCID kind of is a publishing social security number, to put it crudely. So it helps de-ambiguate yourself. And so librarians love it because when we're cataloging your work and we don't know who you are, or there may be two of you at Harvard or whatnot, or you publish under initials instead of your full name, it helps us figure out who you are. And then publishers, granting agencies, and all sorts of other kind of programs and initiatives at all sorts of institutions are kind of increasingly asking for ORCID. So that, because there's a couple of things, if you put your biographical data in ORCID and you include your ORCID in some applications or grants or things like that just makes much more efficient work for both you and then the agency that requested it. And also more and more institutions like Harvard, like the publishers, like granting institutions, are kind of writing records to ORCID. So what's really nice is if you publish a work when the new Dash is live in September, for example, if you were to put a work in Dash, we would push that citation to ORCID so you wouldn't have to curate it yourself. So the idea is that over time, as ORCID becomes much further integrated with all sorts of different systems, all this information is going to be pushed and pulled from this record, this kind of ORCID profile record that you control. So you can kind of say, I want this to be private, public, reveal that, reveal that. So there is the world where we can envision, like if you're applying for a program or a job or something, you just include your ORCID and it's like it autofills and it just has all your information. And again, it's free and open. So I just say to check out this library service page. We have an ORCID hub here at Harvard, which allows you to connect your ORCID to Harvard, which is pretty powerful. So anytime any system like Dash gets ORCIDs, we can kind of push pull data. Yeah, so just consider it. You may find that you need it. And so it's always great to do it up front and have it ready when you need it. I just saw a chat question come through. I think you're asking about more information on ORCID. I'm happy to answer further questions or look at the service page has a lot of information about ORCID. You can certainly reach out to us, but let me know specifically if you have more information. I'm happy to meet with anybody about ORCID. I'm a big ORCID proponent. It's awesome. So that's it. That's it on Dash, and those were the kind of little sidebar reminders I wanted to include. And so I'm happy to answer any questions or fill in any gaps. I'll put my email in the chat too, so that you have that. Sorry for taking 50 minutes. I thought that presentation would be shorter, but I hope it was comprehensive enough.
I have a question. Last time we spoke about capstone being a problem because with DCE there's only thesis. Has that changed?
I don't know the answer to that. That's a decision on the DCE side. So that would be a decision for the student affairs or any of those kind of dean's offices or their programs themselves. We do receive capstones from different schools. Like I think the ed school puts their capstones in. So again, that's for the ETD kind of ETD side. Since that's kind of part of the degree granting process, we basically just receive what the schools decide to send us. And so that's a little separate from kind of your self-deposit of articles, for example, or your own scholarship. Um, so that's we just whatever the schools decide to send to us, we accept. And so if you're interested, if you think capstones would be, a valuable contribution to the scholarly community via Dash, then I would advocate for DC, to advocate up to DCE to try to include those into the Dash workflow when you submit.
Thank you.
Yeah, so the process for, I'll just do a quick ETD thing just to follow up on that. So everybody's, I didn't really describe that. If you do have a thesis or something that's not a capstone that officially marks, your degree, DCE uses what's called the ProQuest ETD administrative tool. And that's a separate tool that you use to submit your thesis, at the end of your degree program. And it goes through, you give a bunch of information when you submit that. And one of them is permission to put it in Dash. And then there's also a permission for ProQuest to have access to it. And so we get a lot of questions on the difference between those two. Dash is obviously what you just saw. It's open access. It's free for all. It's, you get the record, you get all the bells and whistles that I talked about for Dash. And then the other is ProQuest, which is a for-profit company, and it provides dissertations and theses through subscription models. So Harvard, for example, has the ProQuest ETD kind of database, so you can search these theses and dissertations across, all sorts of different schools and disciplines. But there's charges for those. And so we often say, it's a bit maybe redundant for it to be in ProQuest because it's already in Dash and it is available to everyone. ProQuest does kind of sweeten the deal with things like, royalties and things like that. But at the end of the day, you're asked to agree to both, and just know that the ProQuest one does actually go to a company that sells that work, that thesis, to folks who subscribe to that service. And then the approvals go through the DC administration. They kind of approve your degree. And then once it's all approved in that system, then it's pushed to Dash. And so once your thesis is in Dash, if you have any questions or issues with its accessibility, like, oh, I'm going to publish this thesis, and the publisher has told me that I need to take it offline for a while, you can write to us. We can embargo it for a few years. If you need corrections, we can kind of walk you through that process. So anytime you have questions about your thesis in Dash after you graduate, you can certainly circle back with us, and we can talk about any of those issues with you and help get those resolved. The ProQuest is a completely separate process. We have no control over it. And so you would have to contact ProQuest for any issues or concerns or access terms or any of that sort of thing on their end. ProQuest will actually take the dissertation down if you want them to. So some folks have said, I don't want my work to be included in a profit model, take it down, and then it's available on Dash. So most people don't do that, but that's kind of an example of an option that you can do after graduation.